Now, when somebody passes away, especially somebody who is loved by a lot of people, everybody hopes the family can come together. But in real life, death doesn't always bring people closer. Sometimes it brings out old pain. And sometimes death brings out the things people never talked about when everybody was still breathing. And in Takeoff's case, that seems to be what's happening right now. This video is not really about the Takeoff murder trial, which is reportedly scheduled for later this year. This is about the wrongful death settlement connected to his death and the family dispute that came after it. Takeoff's mother, Titania Davenport, filed a lawsuit after he was killed outside A10 Billiards Bowling in Houston. And that lawsuit eventually settled for a confidential amount. But now Takeoff's father, Kenneth Ball, is saying he should get half of that settlement money. And this is where the story becomes complicated, because Takeoff's mother's side is arguing that his father was not really present in Takeoff's life. So now this is not just about a settlement anymore. It becomes a question of who was actually there for Takeoff while he was still alive. Now, from the outside looking in, this could easily be viewed as another one of those, here we go, family fighting over money situations. But I think this story is deeper than that, because I think this kind of story exposes a painful family reality a lot of people can relate to. When somebody dies, the family doesn't just lose that person. They lose the chance to fix things, explain things, or hear how that person really felt. One parent might have done the daily work, made the sacrifices, pay the bills, and carry the stress, while another parent may not have been there the same way, but still feels pain, still feels loss, and still feels like that child belonged to them too. So when money enters the picture, people are not just arguing over money anymore. They're arguing over what the relationship meant. If one parent raised you and the other parent was not there the same way, should they be treated the same after you're gone? And when the person who could answer that question is no longer here, who really gets to speak for them? So just to give you guys some context on how we even got here. After Takeoff was killed outside A10 Billiards Bowling in Houston back in 2022, his mother filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the venue and the property companies connected to it. In that lawsuit, she was listed as Takeoff's surviving parent and also the administrator of his estate. The lawsuit basically argued that the people responsible for the venue knew this was not some regular night. According to the filing, they were told an event would be held there, that it would require extra security, and that a large crowd could show up, including celebrities and public figures. But Takeoff's mother's side claimed the venue still failed to provide proper and adequate security. The lawsuit also claimed there were no proper screening measures, no after-hours controls, and no real enforcement of rules or industry standards to protect the people who were there that night. And according to the lawsuit, Takeoff was an innocent bystander who was hit by stray bullets after gunfire broke out. And that's of course what we know about the facts that were reported about his unfortunate death. So that is where the wrongful death case started. But then in 2023, another layer was added to the story. Takeoff's father, Kenneth Ball, reportedly joined the lawsuit as an intervener. An intervener in this particular example would basically mean that he was not the original person who filed the case, but he was trying to say he had a personal legal stake in the outcome. His lawyer argued that as Takeoff's natural parent, Kenneth Ball had suffered losses too, including funeral and burial expenses, psychological expenses, and other damages connected to losing his son. So Takeoff's mother was the one who originally filed the wrongful death lawsuit, and then his father later joined it. And once the case reportedly settled, the question became even more complicated. How should that money be divided between two parents who may not have had the same role in Takeoff's life? And this is where we get into Takeoff's childhood. Because when a situation like this ends up in court, it's not just about who is legally related to somebody. People start looking at the history of that person's life and start asking a lot of questions. Who was actually there? And with Takeoff, the public version of his life was always built around family. Not just in a vague way, but literally. Migos was not some random group where three artists met at a studio and decided to work together. The whole foundation of the group came from a family environment in Gwinnett County, Georgia. This is where Quavo comes into the story. Quavo was Takeoff's uncle, but because they were only a few years apart, it never really looked like a traditional uncle and nephew relationship. It looked more like two people who, grew up side by side. And they were in the same family circle, around the same household, chasing the same dream, and eventually that bond became part of what made Migos feel so different. So when people thought about Takeoff's family, they usually thought about that side of the story. They thought about Quavo, they thought about Migos and their come up. They thought about Offset, of course. And they thought about the house in Gwinnett County. They thought about the mother side of the family that was visible in interviews, tributes, and the story fans understood. Now here's the important part. Some reports describe Takeoff as being raised by his mother. Other reports describe Migos members spending much of their childhood around Quavo's mother. But that does not automatically mean those stories are contradicting each other, because Takeoff's mother was Quavo's older sister. So from what I understand, it was an extended family system where they all kind of like commingled. A family system where Takeoff's public story was mostly connected to his mother's side. Now his father was not really that visible in the public version of Takeoff's life at all. And I can only speak from the outside, looking in. I'm outside the club, peeking through the windows. But as somebody who's followed Migos since around 2012, I never really had the impression that Takeoff's father was a major part or influence in his story. I kind of got the vibe personally that he did have a father somewhere in the picture, but he wasn't part of the Takeoff story that fans were actually being shown. Why? Well, because there's a lot of people who do have a father, but that father is not really visible in their day-to-day story. And that was always kind of what I assumed with Takeoff, right? And it seems to be consistent with everything that we know. Now, when Migos were first coming up, and they were dropping tapes, doing interviews, building that whole Atlanta identity, the story that fans were introduced to was always centered around that Migos family bond. It was Takeoff, Quavo, Offset, the house they came from, the way they grew up together, and the way they built something from nothing as a family, together. That was a story people and the world understood. So now years later, when his father is involved in a legal fight over settlement money, it naturally makes people ask questions. Not because any of us know the full truth about their relationship, but because publicly this was not the side of Takeoff's life that people were used to seeing, or even used to hearing about. Now once Takeoff's father entered the picture legally, the conversation started shifting towards something deeper than just the money itself. It became about whether he was present, whether he supported Takeoff, and whether he should receive part of the settlement now that Takeoff is no longer here to speak for himself. And that in itself is a conversation that definitely needs to be explored, right? Because it's bigger than just Takeoff. This is really about something that all of us understand. So according to Billboard, the wrongful death case settled at the end of 2025 for a confidential amount. And after the settlement, Kenneth Ball, Takeoff's father, started claiming that he was entitled to half of the settlement money. And this is when Takeoff's mother's legal side decided to push back on this. And basically her side argued that Takeoff's father does not deserve half of the money because they say he was largely absent from Takeoff's life and never financially supported him. They also argued that Takeoff's mother had a close, loving, and nurturing relationship with him for his entire life. Now some more information here. On June 5th in a court filing, Takeoff's mother's lawyers reportedly wrote that Takeoff's mother raised him from birth as a single parent, provided nearly all of his financial support until he became an adult, and even continued helping him after that while he was pursuing music. So basically, Titania Davenport, Takeoff's mother, her side is saying, I was there from the beginning. I raised him, I supported him, and I was still helping him while he was trying to build his career. Now, at least publicly, that lines up with the version of Takeoff's story people have always heard. So even though we still have to treat this as her side of the story, it does not feel like something that came out of nowhere. It makes complete sense from everything that I know, at least. It fits with the family picture that was already attached to Takeoff's public story. And that's what makes this whole thing so painful. Because on one side, you have Takeoff's mother saying, I was there, I raised him, I carried that responsibility. On the other side, you have his father saying, I lost my son too. And since I'm still his father, I deserve to be included. And that is a hard thing to talk about because both of those ideas can exist in the same room. One parent can be the one who carried the daily weight and another parent can still feel the loss. But when the person who died is no longer here to speak for themselves, everybody left behind is now trying to explain what that relationship meant. And I think this is where the conversation becomes bigger than Takeoff. Because we always hear people say blood is thicker than water, but real life is a lot more complicated than that. You can be born into a family and still feel like strangers. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate, right? And you can meet somebody later in life who shows you more loyalty, more protection, and more love than the people who share your last name. I'm sure you can relate to that too. This is why, to me, the real question is involvement. How much did you actually do? And how much were you actually there? Because there is a big difference between being related to somebody and being responsible for somebody and actually carrying that responsibility. And there's also a big difference between housing somebody and actually raising them. Housing somebody means they had somewhere to stay. Raising somebody means you were there shaping them, teaching them, protecting them, correcting them, and instilling values into them. It means carrying that responsibility when nobody was watching, when nobody is applauding you or celebrating you, when there was no praise attached to it, and when there was no immediate benefit. You just did what you did because that was your duty as a parent. And I think this is why situations like this get so emotional. Because if one parent feels like I carry the weight, I made the sacrifices, I was there for the everyday parts nobody saw. And another parent comes in later saying, I lost my child too. Both of those things can be true emotionally. A parent who's absent can still feel pain, right? And that same parent can have regret and still grieve. And they can also acknowledge and know that they were not there the way they should have been and still feel like they lost a part of themselves. But then the uncomfortable question becomes, how much can you use that pain to claim something? Because grief is one thing, but entitlement is a whole nother thing. And I do think there's a lot of cases where fathers especially are pushed out, excluded. So that definitely happens. Sometimes a man may have wanted to be there and was blocked from being there. And also sometimes that same parent may have been present in ways the public never saw. So sometimes the outside world only knows one side of the story. But at the same time, if the question is who should be recognized after death, then your presence in their story should definitely matter. Sacrifices has to matter. The years have to matter. Because when families fight over money after somebody dies, I don't think the money is always the real issue. The money is just the loudest signal. It is the thing that everybody can point to, but underneath that, people are really fighting over recognition. Who mattered, who sacrificed, who gets acknowledged, who gets, erased, and who gets to stand up and say, I was important in this person's life. And that is probably the saddest part of a story like this, because Takeoff is the only person who could truly answer that. He's the only person who could say how he saw his mother, how he saw his father, who was there for him, who hurt him, who he personally forgave, and who he felt carried him through life. But he's of course not here, right? So now here we are today, right? Most families will never go through something like this. A major wrongful death settlement, a famous rapper who got killed, or court documents exposing their private pain to the public. But on a smaller scale, families deal with this all the time. A funeral happens, money gets involved, old resentment comes up, and relatives start remembering the same person in completely different ways. And the hardest part is, the person who could have cleared it up is gone. I don't think this story should be looked at just Takeoff's family fighting over money. I think it's about what death exposes. It exposes who is there, who feels guilty, who feels like they're owed something, who feels forgotten, and who still wants to be recognized in the current moment. And it exposes the painful truth that family is not always about blood alone. Sometimes family is about who carried the weight when nobody was watching. And in this story, without pretending to know every private detail, because obviously I am outside of the club, okay? I understand why Takeoff's mother's side feels the way they feel, because when you look at Takeoff's public story, his mother is not separate from who he became. She is connected to the foundation of it, and there's history of all this, right? And this is the side of the family he grew up around. This is the same family structure that shaped Takeoff and Quavo. This is the environment where that bond was built, where the music started, and where the Migos story even became possible. So it's not just she is his mother, so she deserves sympathy. It's deeper than that. She is attached to every part of the story before the world knew who Takeoff even was. Before the fame, before the money, before the group became legendary. This was the family foundation that helped shape Takeoff into Takeoff. And that's kind of the complicated part, is when the person is gone, it's hard to act like all relationships should automatically be measured the same way. Losing somebody is painful, and I don't want to disrespect anybody's grief, but there's a difference between grieving somebody and being one of the people who carried the responsibility of raising them. And I think that's kind of what this story actually teaches me, at least, is that a lot of family stuff only gets exposed when somebody's no longer here. People a lot of times avoid the conversations while everybody is alive, but once death happens, once money gets involved, and once people start asking who deserves what, all of that history comes back up. And by that point, the one person who could really explain what everybody meant to them is gone. But I'm very curious what you guys think about this, because to me, this is a pretty universal conversation. It's not just about Takeoff, rest in peace is Takeoff, right? It's about family, death, money, and what people believe they're owed after somebody is gone. So you guys let me know in the comment section below what you think. And of course, drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new here. My name is Blackie Speaks. Nice to meet you. And I'll catch you guys in the next video, okay? Peace, I'm out.